0344 499 1000. Where are the haters of the haters come from? This in from James. These are not isolated incidents you mention. I sense there is a wider malaise here because we spent the last 2 decades addressing things like racism and homophobia, which was the right thing to do. We've ended up in a world where establishments and governments are mistakenly framing any grievance as being something similar to racism or homophobia, and that is the fatal error. Do you know, I think that might have summed it up perfectly. It could just be that. I think certainly with the gender issue, that when you start talking about gender problems or discussions or debates, it sounds a little bit like the sexuality discussion. So people go, right, okay, that's a bit like homophobia, so I better just say yes and nod, and because I don't want to get in trouble. And of course, it's nothing of the sort. But I can only think that's where companies go, because you don't meet anybody that agrees with this guff. 0344 499 1000. Now, after the news that Mr. Potato Head is going to go gender neutral and the backlash faced by critics of the decision, we're looking at the state of freedom of speech in this country. The truth is that we keep talking about the subject. Since last year, J.K. Rowling has been subjected to an unrelenting campaign for her concerns that self-identification of gender might compromise women-only spaces. Another example, veteran presenter Alistair Stewart, sometimes of this parish, was forced to resign after tweeting a quotation from Shakespeare which included the phrase angry ape, and because he tweeted that to a black guy, therefore it was seen. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. Therefore, it could only have been racist. It couldn't have been that he happens to send that same quote to lots of people, which, as it turns out, he does. Let's speak to Harry Miller, our next guest, investigated for sharing a poem online that was deemed transphobic. The police turned up, and it's interesting because it turned out to be a non-hate hate crime. Help me out here, Harry. What did they call it?
They call it a non-crime crime. A non-crime hate incident.
A non-crime hate incident. That's the word. A non-crime hate incident. Yes.
Yeah.
So
now it wasn't just a limerick. And the truth is, I know you were joking when you said, "Is it going to be a crime to misgender
Mr. Potato Head?"
I almost said Mr. Potato Head. Then, well,
don't say that.
The fact of the matter is, if you do misgender Mr. Potato Head, there I did it again. You are eligible to be recorded as a hater. And the reason that I know this is because one of the things that I was recorded as a hater for saying was this. I said that I was assigned mammal at birth, but I identify as fish. And this was classed as being so outrageously transphobic that the police were required to come and knock at my door and stop me tweeting such things, because it was very likely going to escalate into me stabbing somebody. So don't even think about misgendering Potato Head, because, Ian, the fact is this: trans women are women, trans men are men, and non-binary potato heads are valid. And if you disagree, you can expect a knock at the door from the thought police.
And told to check your thinking.
Yeah, absolutely. Check your thinking, check your pronouns, check your speech, check all of these things. Now, you're absolutely right. Nobody believes any of this. Nobody. But there's an entire industry that is being run by Stonewall and being run by this bloated organisation called the College of Policing, which has to find hate even when there is no hate.
Yep.
And this is the reason that they paraded a 10-foot billboard around the car park of Asda earlier this week, saying that being offensive is an offence. Well,
this was in Merseyside, of course, wasn't it?
Yeah, it's never been an offence. How on earth does a police force spend 750 quid to tell a massive, great big lie to the people of the Wirral? Yeah. How do they do that? Well, the reason they do it is because they have to generate more and more hate. And where hate doesn't exist, they invent some. So we can fully expect there to be a special division of the police.
But here's the thing, Harry. I mean, if I sat down and had a pint with the copper that knocked at your door and said you'd committed a non-hate, what's it called again? It's a non-crime hate incident. If I sat and had a pint with him, he would probably tell me that he knows this is also cobblers, and his boss knows that as well.
I'm not so sure. You see, there's a police force within a police force that we have now. We have regular bobbies who don't believe any of this nonsense. And then we have this ideological police force who absolutely do believe it. I mean, I remember him saying to me with absolute sincerity. What you said, what you've got to understand, Mr. Miller, is that sometimes in the womb, a female brain accidentally grows the wrong body parts. And that's what being trans is. And I said, you've got to be kidding me, mate. And he said, no, I've been on a course. And the guy was being honest.
Wow.
Yeah, he believed it. He absolutely believed it. And the thing is, he's free to believe that, but he is coercing us also into believing it, because if we don't believe it, we end up with this non-crime hate incident.
And this is the thing. I mean, it would be, all this would be fine if it was kind of just confined to a very small area of people who had these beliefs and thought that anything you might say, or I might say, or anybody else might say, if they want to believe that these things are full of hate, then that's up to them. However, you know, I mentioned this at the beginning. We're talking about the police force here. We're talking about the police. We're talking about governments. We're talking about laws changing, institutions, banks, big corporations. They're all on board with this, Harry. That's the bit that I can't get my head around. They're all on board with something they don't really believe.
Well, the person who was on before me got it absolutely right. They make a false equivalence between racism and homophobia. And they say it's very much like racism, very much like homophobia. You better get on board with all this nonsense.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you're literally a racist and literally a homophobe, and you're literally Hitler. And the police, who are still suffering from a burden of guilt from how badly they behaved over Stephen Lawrence, they take it hook, line, and sinker in order to absolve themselves. That's what this is all about. They're blaming us to try and absolve themselves of their own guilt, their own historical guilt. And it's pathetic. I
wonder, listen, Harry, it's always good to have you on. Let's speak again on this. That's Harry Miller. We've spoken to Harry a few times on this. He was the guy that, he's there to combat police interference in free speech, but he found himself on the receiving end of it, a knock at the door, and he was told he was guilty of a non-crime hate incident. So he hadn't done anything unlawful, but it was a non-crime hate incident. It's still going to be logged. That's outrageous. That is outrageous, and nobody seems to give a toss about this. Isn't that the funniest thing? Not a hoot. Nowhere along the line is anybody that bothered.